The moon hung like a polished blade above the ruins, bright enough to etch every broken edge in silver, cold enough to make breath look like smoke from a dying altar fire. Wind moved through the ribs of the fallen temple, humming in stone cavities, lifting ash and frost in slow spirals. Somewhere beneath that winter brightness lay a girl, small against the enormity of carved pillars and toppled wolves, wrists lashed with chainwork etched in dead runes, eyes open to the sky as if the night might answer. Seren Vale did not blink. She had learned the cost of blinking on the night her mother's name was cut from the ledger and burned to cinders. She had learned to hold the sky and let it hold her back, to become a stillness that predators passed by, mistaking for rock or bone. Even stillness ached. The metal had frozen to skin. Each shift was a theft of warmth. She counted seconds by the throb at her temples and named them. Hunger, hurt, hush, to keep them from owning her. The ruins had once been a sanctuary. The capitals of the pillars wore wolves with eyes of obsidian, their snouts lifted to a moon that no longer remembered their prayers. The central dais, cracked along a lightning seam, held a shallow bowl of ice where libations used to pool. Vines clawed up the stone as if climbing toward a god that stopped listening. Snow had collected in the hollows of carved paws and mouths. Even the wind seemed reluctant to cross the threshold, as though something old waited beneath the frost, awake and watching. At the base of her left wrist, beneath iron and cold, a mark lived. It had slept through years of taunts, through the ceremony where a knot of elders had pressed scented smoke into her hair and named her less than wolfless, unbound. But sleep is not death. Sometimes it is gathering. Tonight the mark breathed like a coal in silk, a faint pulse beneath the skin. Once, then nothing, then once again. So soft it could be mistaken for memory. Seren felt it. She chose not to hope. Hope is a mouth that never closes. Beyond the broken arch of the nave, the mountain valley lay in pearl shadow. Pines rose like spears. Ice glazed the river a color between blade and milk. Far off, a howl stitched itself to the ice-sheet sky and tore again. Wolves hunted clean lines through the trees. Men hunted uglier ones. Hoofbeats would sound different on snow than on stone. She listened for them and heard neither, which was almost worse. Waiting flattens time. Fear wrinkles it. Here, in these ruins, both happened at once. A cloud veiled the moon, and the world dimmed by a single shade. In that softening, the ruins remembered their shape. Altar, transept, nave. A place built to magnify a voice. Serene's voice lived behind her teeth like a swallowed star. The chains were ceremonial in intent but meticulous in engineering. Each link had a raised ridge where runes once were. Each ridge had been filed smooth by the hands of men who no longer believed, so that faith could become function without admitting it. Whoever set them knew precisely how much movement to grant a body and how much to deny, the exact degree to stall circulation without risking a quick end. There is cruelty, and then there is craft. She had met both. She catalogued smallness, the needle pricks of heat where skin still fought, the numb territories conquered by winter, the taste at the back of the tongue that is more iron than blood, more sorrow than iron. She made a list of promises she would not make. She refused to promise to live. She refused to promise to die. Promises have listeners. She had none left she trusted. The first sign came not as hoof or breath, but pressure. The air thickened the way it does before thunder. It pressed into the hollows of the ruin, as if a storm had bent to peer through the ribs of the temple, to decide whether what lay inside belonged to it. The obsidian eyes of the carved wolves seemed to drink that pressure and drink her with it. Ice in the libation bowl cracked along hairline fractures, a quiet report like a knuckle popping in a clenched fist. Snow seeded beneath weight just beyond the arch. A faint, deliberate sound. Not the scatter of a patrol, not the nervous shifting of a squire. Something heavier and more contained. The kind of presence that absorbs sound rather than making it. The chain at Seren's wrist tightened in reflex and burned her back awake. In the shadow between columns, a silhouette gathered itself from night. Tall, spare, wrapped in a dark mantle that seemed to extinguish stray light rather than reflect it. The wind changed behavior. It avoided him. The way water moves around a stone. The way birds lift before an old predator passes beneath the trees. He did not rush. Rushing belongs to men who must convince the world they have arrived. He stepped, as if the ruin had always had a place for his feet carved into it, whether discovered now or a century from now. The mantle slept against his shoulders without fluttering. When he stopped, the ruin stilled, as if stone and ice both decided to listen single-mindedly. The moon crawled free of cloud. Its light found the silver of a circlet at his brow and turned it to a cold ember. Cursed kings do not wear gold. They wear iron dressed as silver and expect it to bite. His hair was black where it wasn't winter. His skin held that glow moving fire becomes when it chooses to be quiet. His hands were ungloved. The scars there told their own alphabet. Short strokes, a few long sentences. He stood a breath beyond the reach of her chain and did not reach. Distance can be a mercy. It can also be a test. Once in a town that pretended it was not afraid, Seren had seen the Alpha King of Bloodvale on a coin, rendered poorly by a mint that could manage only power and profile. The man in the ruins did not resemble a coin. He resembled a cliff at dusk, something the sun abandons slowly, layer by layer, leaving only the fact of its height. From the waist down he did not shift. Stillness, there was not theatrical, but lived in. The rumors said a ritual had eaten his legs and gone to bed inside his spine. Rumors are always cowards. They never look a man in the eyes to confirm themselves. He looked at her wrists, at the chain, at the runes that did not believe in themselves. He looked at the mark that had slept and was practicing waking. He did not set his gaze on her face for long. Kings who have lost things understand how dangerous names can be when spoken with the eyes. He set his palm to the chain, not the lock, not the iron ring in the stone, but the link touching her skin. Heat lives in different species. There is forge heat that makes metal obedient. There is fever heat that eats language out of a body. There is a heat that is not temperature at all but permission. The chain gave a single low sound, not a clang, more of a sigh, and then separated where it had chosen to believe itself unbreakable. The break was clean. No shard flew. The mark beneath Seren's wrist beat one hard time against bone and then steadied, as if the pulse itself stood at attention. He did not lift her. He unspooled the rest of the chain from her ankles, placed it on the stone beside the libation bowl as if setting down a sleeping animal he had decided not to kill, and waited. Waiting is a language. In it he said, "Stand if you want to." In it he said, "If you fall, I will not pretend I did not see." The ruin watched with the intensity of an abandoned theater receiving actors again. Seren drew breath carefully, invited her feet to remember what bodies are for, gathered weight under herself like a creature with more winter than summer in its bones, and rose. Numbness argues. It says falling is a better story. It says stone and snow will let you be the kind of quiet that finally cannot be judged. Perseverance says other things, none of them eloquent. They are one-syllable words, carved with a bone knife. She chose one of those words and put it beneath the other foot. When she stood, every sound in the ruin seemed louder, as if gravity had resumed a conversation with her and could not stop talking. Beyond the arch, the escort waited. Not many. Numbers impress crowds, not ruins. Horses steamed in the cold, breath rising and being taken apart by moonlight. Men in black leathers sat straight-backed with the habit of those who have learned to outstare ghosts. No pennants snapped. This was not a procession. It was a retrieval. The king moved ahead of her, and the air found a way to move around both of them, without touching either. The path down from the ruin was a ribbon of stone with a memory of steps beneath the snow. Pines lined it like a guard that never fell asleep. Seren's footprints printed a grammar that would vanish by dawn. She did not look back at the temple. Looking back is a ritual of people who believe the past will not follow them. The past can run. The past has teeth. They rode not for speed, but for silence. Snow takes sound and files it to dust. Hooves said almost nothing. Leather said less. The night gave what it could: distance, frost, a sky that seemed to be made of hammered iron. Once, a fox crossed the trail and stared with a steady impudence only hunger affords. Once, an owl turned its head and considered the burden of knowing faces in the dark. Once, Seren's mark pulsed under her bandage in a pattern that did not match any heartbeat she had ever owned. She pressed her wrist to her sternum to see if the two would learn each other's names. They did not yet. Hunger arrived late and unceremonious. Bread broke beneath her fingers in a shower of clean crumbs. The cheese admitted salt like a confession. A clay mug of something pine-sweet and bitter soothed the inside of the mouth that iron had roughed. She slept only after instructing her hands to forget the shape of chain and remember the curve of blanket. Sleep obeyed, but not for long. The night returned as a visitor who knows the latch. It entered soft-footed and set its weight at the foot of the bed. Seren woke with the clarity of a creature that has taught fear a particular tone. The hearth held its ember red and looked innocent about it. The window wrote a square on the floor and pretended it had always lived there. The door did not open. The handle did not turn. Still, someone stood on the far side of the wood and listened until listening changed things. A breath found the narrow crack along the jamb. A steady draw, a steady release. A sound that did not belong to a man concerned about being heard. It had weight, like the sea in a conch. A wolf's breath has that lesson in it. The lesson of lungs honest about the work they do. The breath stood with her a long time and then withdrew, leaving the air oddly clean, as if certain ideas had been aired out. She slept again then, knowing there was a listener in this house who had never been invited and would not be sent away. Morning in stone arrives as a verdict. It lands on floorboards and across the ridge of a bed's foot, asks the eyes to shoulder it, and moves on. Seren bathed until her skin remembered heat without pain. When she bound her wrists, she did it with clean linen. If anything listened, it would find a different music there now. She moved to the window and let the mountain handle her with its gaze. The court below performed a vocabulary of blades: lunge, yield, shore, strike. No one used blunt edges. Learning to bleed in training teaches a person to count differently. A knock came that was not a question. The door opened just enough to allow a girl to enter with a tray, and a silence practiced as an occupation. The girl's eyes held more winter than her years ought to. She set down hearth-warm bread and a cut of meat so red it almost argued philosophy. On the tray lay a folded strip of silk the color of smoke. When the girl left, she did not look back. Looking back is a kind of invitation. Days arranged themselves in a pattern that threatened to become habit. She walked the edge of permitted corridors like a shoreline. The guards learned her footfall without even looking, permitting a certain radius that neither narrowed nor expanded. In the courtyard, iron met iron. In the stables, a groom sang to a horse through a bad dream. At dusk, the lamps in the long hall woke one after another, a string of small dawns. She memorized the order they woke in. Memory is a tool when doors lack proper locks. The first blood she healed in this place did not belong to a king. A young warrior, scarcely older than she had been when the ledger burned, misread a feint and caught a blade across the ribs. He refused the hand of his pack-brother with a pride that had bark on it. Pride is a narrow bridge over a deep water. Seren stepped to him with her palms already remembering a heat that was hers without being the hearth's. Touch asks permission even when words are not invited. His body granted it ungraciously. Under her hand, flesh knit a fraction, then more. The pain learned how to stand behind him rather than in front. The boy did not thank her. He stared at the space her fingers had occupied as if it contained geometry he had not been taught. Later, outside her door, she found a pair of boots that belonged to exactly her feet and a strip of leather softened by years of wear. Gratitude seldom speaks the language of ceremony where winter rules. The mark at her wrist elaborated its pulse by degrees. Not quite a beat, not quite a code, more like a tide that had learned a local moon. On the third night, the warmth that visited the door learned the timbre of her name without saying it. On the fourth, the mountain dreamed a storm and did not deliver it. On the fifth, a bell far within the citadel woke an echo in a throat that did not wish to sing and sang anyway. The bone knows the difference between omen and routine. Her bone knew omen. He stood in her doorway like a horizon suddenly nearer. No mantle this time, no circlet. The chair contrivance waited at the threshold, with the quiet nobility of an instrument used well. He moved into the room with the skill of a man who habitually refuses pity even from furniture. The hearth chose that sentence to pop. Sparks rose and died before they learned the word for flight. He stood where the light from the window and the heat from the fire met and measured her room with his eyes the way a sailor measures a harbor's cunning. He noticed the untouched silk on the tray by the bed. He noticed the boots that were not hers but now were. He noticed the way the air held her outline a fraction longer than air usually does. The attention of a king, even a cursed one, has gravity. It drew the corners of things a little inward. His gaze found the bandage at her wrist. The mark beneath it answered without shame. A dim gold accepting that it was being spoken to and deciding not to hide. He waited for her to choose stillness or motion. She chose to breathe. Breathing is not nothing. It is the first and last rebellion. When he left, the air did not relax. It deferred. Night fell with the sound of rehearsed boots in distant corridors. Somewhere, power bowed its head. Not in submission, but in recognition that something unpredicted had been admitted to the room and would have to be accounted for henceforth. In the courtyard, Steele learned a new angle. In the stables, a horse stopped dreaming badly. In the lowest kitchen, a girl rolled dough and did not know why the dough felt more obedient that evening. Seren lay awake and counted a different set of seconds. These were not named for hunger or hurt. They were named for thresholds. The first threshold is the one a body crosses when it admits it has survived. The second is the one a place crosses when it admits it has begun to include you in its mathematics. The third is the one the moon crosses when it chooses to lean closer to a particular window at a particular hour and lay a band of light. Like an oath across a stranger's bed, the band of light found her throat and lay there. The mark warmed without flare, like a coal deciding to become a hearth if entrusted with wood. The breath outside her door returned and did not pretend it belonged to anyone else. The wolves carved at the temple had obsidian eyes because the craftsman had no way to trap real fire in stone. Here, in this citadel, a similar problem had been solved another way. A wolf lived in the hall that was not a wolf and breathed without breaking the door. Some curses build houses inside bodies and wait. Some houses invite them to roam until they learn to behave. She slept, finally, not like the conquered, not like the condemned, but like the watched. Watching can be a kind of safety if the watcher is the right sort of danger. Dreams came without images, only textures. Frost on fur, iron with a memory of blood, the weight of a hand that had not yet chosen to touch. In that texture a sentence unrolled without words. Arrival is not rescue. But it is the only place rescue can begin. When she woke, Dawn had sketched a pale line under the door, and her wrist did not feel like a wound that remembered its maker. The citadel continued about its business of defying mountains. Far off, a bell spoke a number that meant counsel or trouble. The morning smelled of steel, smoke, and pine sap bruised under boot. Seren rose and dressed with care that was not vanity. Care is a kind of armor cities teach and ruins refine. Beyond her window, the world insisted on itself. Towers held their heights. The training yard drew the blood it needed to certify skill and no more. Somewhere inside the stone, a prophecy stirred and asked for breath. Prophecies are like wolves. They do not come when called, only when the wind and hunger align. The wind aligned first. Hunger had already done its work, and in the heart of Bloodvale, beneath banners that preferred shadow to show, a throne waited with a man on it who did not walk, and yet could make storms remember their manners. He had unfastened a chain that believed itself eternal. The part of him that chose to do that would not sleep again. The moon would return with more to say. The mark would learn new grammar. The wolves would recognize an old story wearing a new name. For now, a girl stood at a window in a citadel grown from cliff and decided not to run. Sometimes refusing to run is the loudest sound a life can make. The castle of Bloodvale breathed like a living thing. Stones sighed with heat where fires burned deep within its heart, and hallways whispered in drafts that remembered centuries of footsteps. Every surface seemed aware, of history, of burden, of eyes that once ruled and never closed. Seren Vale walked through that vast silence, feeling it press against her skin. The walls were older than any name she knew, veined with silver ore that glimmered like veins of moonlight frozen in rock. The air smelled faintly of pine and steel, as if the mountain itself was inside the walls. Her reflection followed her in the dark glass of the torch sconces. Pale, too alive to be welcome. This place did not tolerate the living easily. The king had not summoned her again. Since the night he broke her chains, Darius Kaelthorn had vanished back into his chambers, a man surrounded by walls even thicker than these. His servants spoke little, and when they did, their words bent around his name like wind around a cliff. They said he rarely slept. They said sometimes the torches went out on their own near his door. They said the wolf that once ruled through him had gone quiet. Seren wondered what it meant for a wolf to sleep. She learned the rhythm of the citadel, the way an exile learns the language of new captivity. At dawn, bells hummed low, not calling to prayer, but to discipline. At noon, the sound of training echoed from the lower courtyards, steel on steel, growls swallowed by the mountain wind. At dusk, silence stretched so far she could hear the snow melting on the roofs above. And at night, something else. A breath. A pacing sound in the corridor beyond her chamber door. A low rhythmic sound that wasn't human, wasn't servant, wasn't guard. At first, she thought it was dream. But dreams don't leave paw prints. On the fourth night, the prince appeared, faint, precise, black as ash, leading from her door to the end of the corridor and disappearing into nothing. No hound was kept here, no beast allowed within the royal wing. Yet the prince returned every night, and every night, when the moon rose, her mark burned faintly beneath its bandage, pulsing like something listening through her skin. In the stillness, she would press her hand to the wall and feel it thrum, a heartbeat inside stone. A heartbeat that wasn't hers. Down below, life continued with its careful cruelty. The council chamber echoed with polished lies. She could feel them when she passed. Men with rings heavy as their words glanced at her and turned away. They called her the King's Stray, when they thought she couldn't hear. But eyes followed her, not just those of men, but of something older. The shadows in this castle had interest, and interest was rarely safe. Days blurred. The mountain snow thickened. Her bandaged wrist itched, glowing sometimes in faint gold when no one watched. The girl who brought her meals crossed herself every time the light appeared. The guards outside her chamber no longer made jokes when she passed. Whatever she had been before, she was something else now, something that the mountain recognized but the people feared. The first time she saw him again was by accident. She had wandered farther than she should have, down a corridor where the air grew warmer, charged, alive with something she couldn't name. At the end of that hall stood a door marked with runes, old and deep, carved to keep things out, or in. The guards were gone. The air hummed faintly with a pulse she could feel in her teeth. She shouldn't have entered. But the ruin in her blood recognized the ruin in this place. The door opened before she touched it. Inside was darkness layered like silk. The scent of metal and storm filled the air. Torches along the wall burned lower, as if bowing to something unseen. And in the center, a throne of black iron, carved with wolves that looked ready to leap from the metal. On it, Darius Kaelthorn sat motionless, his body a sculpture of command and decay. His eyes were closed. His hands rested on the throne's arms, veins lit faintly beneath the skin, glowing faintly gold, the same color as her mark. Around him, air bent like heat. The temperature shifted with each breath he didn't take. It was as though the man was both there and not, a body suspended between storm and silence. Seren stood at the threshold, unable to move closer. Something in her spine trembled, not fear, but recognition. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the veins glowing in his hands. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a ripple of shadow rising behind the throne, tall and wolf-shaped. Its eyes opened, molten, ancient, watching her from a world just out of reach. And then, silence. The air went still. The glow faded from his veins. The shadow vanished. The king exhaled once, shallow, slow. The sound filled the hall like thunder learning restraint. She fled before he could open his eyes. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mark burned hot enough to leave a faint glow across her blanket. Outside, snow fell in slow, deliberate sheets, covering everything in quiet. When she closed her eyes, she saw that room again, the black throne, the motionless king, the beast behind him, the eyes that had found her, and underneath all of it, she felt the same heartbeat, not her own, not his, but something between, a bond she hadn't chosen, already growing roots beneath her ribs. In the days that followed, the castle began to change. Torches near her quarters burned brighter when she entered. The wolves carved into the stair rails seemed to shift subtly, their eyes following her. Whispers spread like infection. The cursed king's magic was stirring again, but Darius Kaelthorn did not appear. His chamber doors remained closed. The air around them crackled faintly, like a sky before lightning. The servants began leaving offerings outside his hall. Candles, bits of silver, broken chains. None dared step inside, none except her. That night, the prince came again. But this time they stopped at her bedside. The sound came next. A deep inhale, close enough that she felt it move the air against her neck. The wolf that slept in the king's shadow had found her. She opened her eyes to the faintest shimmer of gold in the dark. Not torchlight, not moonlight, but something alive. For a moment, she thought she heard a voice, not words, but meaning. A warning, a promise, a hunger. And then it was gone, leaving the scent of cold iron and pine. When dawn came, the prince led from her bed to her door, and past it toward the royal wing. No one else saw them. No one else believed they existed. But Seren Vale understood what they meant. The wolf was awake. And it was no longer sleeping only inside the king. The throne room of Bloodvale was not a hall. It was a wound carved into the mountain. Its ceiling rose high enough to swallow voices, and its pillars were carved from stone so black it refused to reflect light. Every step across the marble floor echoed like a heartbeat too slow, too heavy, too aware of its own burden. Seren Vale stood beneath that ceiling as snowlight poured through narrow windows, turning the chamber into a cathedral of shadows. The great banners hung motionless, dark red and silver, the colors of a crown that no longer believed in mercy. Before her, the Crimson Council assembled, 5 men wrapped in velvet and deception, their rings heavy with the scent of old gold. Between them, on the dais, sat the king, Darius Kaelthorn, the man who broke her chains, the man who had not spoken to her since. He was still and silent, his hands resting on the arms of his throne as though holding the mountain itself steady. His eyes were half in shadow, the color of storms before they break. Behind him, carved wolves stood on either side, jaws open, their teeth catching the firelight like warnings. The air between them felt like glass about to shatter. The council began to speak, not to the king, but around him, like men circling a sleeping beast, hoping to wake it on their own terms. Their words were sharp, accusations hidden inside formality. They called Seren the witch from the ruins, the marked one, the curse returned in flesh. Each word dropped like ice into her lungs. She said nothing. She couldn't. Silence was the only armor she owned here, but even silence has weight. It grew heavier as they spoke, as they painted her a danger, a vessel for ruin, the reason the king's curse stirred once more. Every lie they told seemed to find echo in the torches. The flames twisted, bent, hissed, as though the air itself disagreed. Darius did not move. Not until one of the councilmen, Lord Varric, pale and wolf-thin, dared to step closer, called her a mistake that should have been left to die. He said her survival was an insult to the throne and the gods alike. The words were still leaving his lips when the torches went out. All of them. The room fell into darkness so pure it had a pulse, and then that sound, a low guttural growl rolling. The wolf was awake. The council stumbled back, their fine shoes scraping the marble. The growl deepened, a sound that made glass tremble and bone remember fear. In the flicker of a rekindling torch, Seren saw it. Just for a breath, a shape taller than a man. Eyes like molten gold, fur black as iron, smoke rising from its paws as though the ground itself couldn't hold its weight. It stood behind the king's throne like a ghost given form. And Darius, he was still seated. But his hands were clenched now, the veins in his arms glowing faintly through the skin. The same color as Serene's mark. The wolf's shadow moved first. It lunged, not toward her, not toward the king, but toward the man who had spoken her death sentence. Varric fell to his knees before the creature reached him, choking on his own voice. The wolf's growl broke off, replaced by silence so deep the room itself seemed to flinch, and then the torches burned again. Sudden, bright, furious. The wolf was gone. Varric was still alive, trembling, pale as wax. A single mark scorched the marble where the beast had stood, a print, blackened into stone, smoking faintly. The scent of lightning lingered in the air. Only then did Darius speak. His voice was quiet, almost human, and yet every syllable bent the air, made the walls listen. The council froze where they stood. Whatever words they had left died behind their teeth. He told them the matter was settled. The girl would remain under the crown's protection. Anyone who defied that would answer to him. and to the thing that had remembered how to breathe through him. He didn't look at her when he said it, but she could feel it. That invisible tether between them tightening, thrumming through her chest like a second pulse. The mark on her wrist glowed faintly beneath the bandage, answering something in him neither of them understood. When the chamber emptied, she remained. The guards hesitated to touch her. The air around her still hummed with what had just happened, as if magic had been drawn, tested, and left hungry for more. Darius didn't move. For a long while he was as still as the throne itself, a monument to restraint. Then, without opening his eyes, he spoke again, his voice lower now, quieter. The storm behind it folded into a whisper. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a warning. It was something in between. A vow half remembered. You shouldn't have been there. The words weren't meant for her, yet they reached her like a hand she didn't know whether to take or fear. She turned to leave. As the doors closed behind her, she caught her reflection in the burnished steel. Pale, trembling with faint gold flickers under her skin. For a moment, she thought she saw another reflection layered over hers. Eyes that weren't hers, staring from the same face. The wolf, watching, waiting, claiming. That night when she returned to her chamber, the moonlight fell hard through her window, white, sharp, almost blinding. Her wrist burned, and somewhere deep in the castle, far below the sleeping halls, a howl rose. Low, lonely, powerful enough to make the mountain shake. The king did not command it. The council could not silence it. The world itself seemed to pause to listen. The wolf that slept was no longer dreaming. It was awake, and bound to her. The castle dreamed that night. Not with peace, but with the slow, restless memory of something that wanted to be remembered. Wind slipped through cracks in the tower stones and carried whispers down the corridors. Voices too soft to name, words too old to translate. Seren Vale woke to them, her pulse caught between heartbeat and echo, as though her body remembered a sound her mind had never learned. She sat upright in the darkness, drenched in cold sweat. The fire had long died. The air shimmered faintly, dust rising in soft spirals. Her mark burned, not like a wound, but like an eye opening from within. When she peeled back the bandage, she saw it for the first time in full. It wasn't a scar anymore. It was a sigil. Elegant, circular, alive with faint threads of gold and silver weaving through her skin like veins of starlight. It pulsed in rhythm with something deeper, something not her own. From somewhere below, a sound followed. Low, steady, distant. It was not the wolf this time. It was a heartbeat, not hers, not his, the heartbeat of the castle. By dawn, mist blanketed the courtyards. The guards walked slower than usual, their armor dulled by frost. The banners hung limp, weighed down by dew, and in the hall where she had once been condemned, the air shimmered faintly again, as though something unseen moved beneath it. Seren had started to notice these things. The changes, the tremors in the walls when she passed, the way fire bent toward her when she walked too close, the way the air warmed when she whispered the king's name in her thoughts. There were too many coincidences in a world that did not believe in them. That afternoon, a summons came. A young guard, pale, voice unsteady, brought her to the east wing. The healer was waiting there. Leora. She was older than she looked, with hair white as frost, and eyes that saw through silk and bone. Her robes were simple, her hands scarred by herbs and magic. She did not bow. Healers never bow. They serve the body first, the crown second. The gods never. Sit, she said softly. Seren did. The woman studied her for a long while, saying nothing. Then she reached forward and touched the edge of the mark. The reaction was immediate. The air between them snapped like lightning. Candles flared. The walls trembled faintly, as if the castle itself were inhaling. Leora's eyes widened. Not with fear, but with recognition. "The silent moon," she whispered. The prophecy was true. The healer began to speak, slowly, carefully, as though the words themselves might draw attention from something listening. Centuries ago, before the Bloodvale crown, before kings and thrones and curses, there were the moonbound, wolves and humans born from the same breath. Each generation, one child would be born wolfless, empty, fragile, forgotten, but carrying within them the ancient heart of balance. The silent moon. The prophecy said this soul would one day awaken the sleeping Alpha, the king who could no longer shift, whose wolf was chained by his own power. But prophecy always demanded price. For the Alpha to rise, the silent moon would burn. Her life would become the bridge, her body the vessel, her soul the offering. Seren listened in silence as the words coiled around her like chains made of truth. Everything in her wanted to deny it. The legend, the fate, the cruelty of being chosen by something she had never asked to serve. But denial couldn't erase the mark glowing beneath her skin, or the way the king's presence haunted her even from a distance. A pull in her chest that hurt when he was near, and hurt worse when he wasn't. That night she dreamed again. Not of wolves, of fire. A vast plain of burning snow stretched under a black sky. In the center stood the king, Darius, his body haloed in ash and gold. Around him, fire roared, yet none of it touched him. When he turned, his eyes were the same molten gold she'd seen in the wolf's reflection. And when he spoke, his voice wasn't one, it was two. "You carry my ruin, Seren Vale. You carry my salvation." The words struck like thunder inside her skull. She woke with a scream that never reached her lips. The fire in her room had reignited, every candle, every log, burning without flame, only light. And in that glow, something moved across the wall, a shadow of a wolf's head, jaw open, breathing, days blurred into silence. The king did not call her again, but she felt him everywhere. In the tremor beneath the floor when she walked, in the tremble of her mark when she stood near his door, in the flicker of torches that bent toward her like they remembered his breath. It was not affection that bound them. It was gravity. It was the pull between sun and moon, the inevitable orbit of one soul around another. The curse was shifting. She could feel it, like ice cracking underfoot before the fall. When Leora came again, she brought with her an old book, bound in hide and sealed with iron clasps. She set it down on the table and opened it to a page where the ink glowed faintly blue. There, drawn in runes and circles, was her mark. Perfectly. Every line, every symbol, every pulse, and beneath it, a phrase written in a language that shimmered when read aloud. "When fire meets frost, the moon will bleed and the bond will wake." The healer's voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you understand what that means?" Seren didn't. Not yet. But her heart did. She could feel it. That same balance of heat and cold, fury and calm, warring inside her veins. Her blood was learning its purpose. Her body was becoming its vessel. She was not cursed. She was chosen. And choice in this kingdom was the cruelest gift of all. That evening, snow fell harder than it had all winter. Winds howled around the citadel like voices trying to warn her. The storm pressed its face against the glass of her window, desperate to be let in. She stood there for a long time, watching the white blur outside. Then, Faintly. Across the courtyard, she saw it. A figure in black, seated by the throne room window. His crown glinted once in the lightning, the Alpha King. Awake. Watching. Between them, across the frozen glass, two forces stared through distance and time. His curse. Her mark. Both glowing faintly, answering each other. And though no sound passed between them, the meaning was clear. The bond had begun, and the world would burn for it. Storms were rare over Bloodvale. But that night, thunder crawled across the mountains like a beast remembering its hunger. Lightning flashed against the towers, and for a moment, the citadel looked alive, ribs of stone pulsing with. The storm wasn't from the sky. It was from within. Seren Vale could feel it. The same pressure she had felt in the throne room now moved through the castle halls. Silent, invisible, heavy as guilt. Something had shifted in the heartbeat of Bloodvale. The walls listened. The air hid secrets, and every candle trembled as if the wind had learned to fear. She had not seen the king in days. Not since the night she saw him watching from across the storm. But his absence was no longer emptiness. It was gravity. Every corridor bent toward his name. Every whisper led to his chamber. The guards' eyes followed her differently now, not as a prisoner, not as a threat, but as if she carried a blade they could not see. And she did. Her blood, her mark, her bond. That was weapon enough. It began with silence. Then footsteps, hurried, heavy, echoing down the hall. A door burst open. Captain Aaron entered, soaked in rain and blood, eyes wild. He had been Darius's loyal guard since the old wars. His loyalty was carved into scars on his arms, symbols of oath and sacrifice. But tonight there was something else in his gaze. Fear. "They're moving against him," he said. "The council." Seren froze. He didn't have to explain. She had seen their eyes the day of her judgment, the way they looked at the king when he spoke her name. To them she was not a girl. She was the curse's reflection, and killing her would be their cure. "They won't stop at him," Aaron said, voice low. "They'll burn everything. The archives, the priests, the healers. Anything tied to the prophecy, she whispered. "The silent moon," he answered, almost in disbelief. "They know." For a heartbeat, the world felt too small. The air thickened around her. The torches burned blue, and then the ground beneath them shuddered. A deep, groaning sound that came from far below. Aaron turned toward the sound. His hand went to the hilt of his blade. "Too late," he said. The first explosion came from the west wing. A roar of fire and shattering glass. Smoke billowed through the corridors, thick and black, carrying the scent of oil and iron. Screams followed, short, sharp, and silenced. Serene ran. Aaron caught her arm. "The king's chamber is below. Follow me." They moved through halls that no longer looked like the castle she knew. Every shadow alive, every sound stretched too thin. The floor vibrated beneath her feet, as if the mountain itself had begun to stir. When they reached the lower stairs, 2 guards lay dead, burned, their armor melted into their flesh. The sigil of the Crimson Council was carved into their chests. The great hall leading to Darius's chamber was already half in ruin. Fire licked the arches. The stained glass windows bled color onto the floor. And in the center, surrounded by 6 armored men, stood the king. He sat, as always, in his chair of iron. But the man who had once seemed restrained now radiated something else, something vast, quiet, and lethal. His hands rested on the arms of his chair, glowing faintly from within, veins lit gold like molten cracks in stone. The soldiers hesitated, blades drawn but trembling. Aaron moved first, stepping forward. "My king, stay back," Darius said. His voice cut the air clean. It wasn't anger. It was control sharpened to a knife's edge. Seren's breath caught. He was different. Not broken, not cursed, burning. The smoke curved away from him, pulled by unseen force. The firelight bent toward his body like metal drawn to a magnet, and when his eyes lifted to meet hers, just once, across the chaos, she felt her knees weaken. The mark on her wrist flared white-hot, and for the first time, she saw her reflection in his eyes, not as a prisoner, not as a prophecy, as something equal, something dangerous. The soldiers lunged. The throne room erupted into violence. Steel met stone, magic met muscle. The first blade that touched him shattered. The second melted before it reached his chest. Darius moved without moving, his power unfurling like a shadow's breath. The sound it made was not thunder, not lightning, but the deep, aching groan of the earth remembering it could break. Aaron pulled Seren behind the fallen column. "We have to go. He can't hold this forever." But she couldn't look away. The curse was no longer sleeping. The wolf behind the king had stepped forward, and yet it didn't strike her. It watched her. It bowed, just like before. When the last soldier fell, silence returned, a silence full of smoke and the stench of burning metal. Darius's head hung low, his hands shaking. The gold beneath his skin flickered, fading to dull crimson. Heroine moved first, helping Seren to her feet. But before they could speak, Darius's voice broke the quiet, soft, ragged. "They'll come again," he said. "This place will fall before the dawn." "Then we leave," Aaron said. "Through the lower tunnels." Darius's gaze flicked to Seren. "Take her," he said. But she shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." Something sharp passed between them, not defiance, not command, recognition, a shared truth too dangerous to name aloud. Aaron hesitated. "There's no time." "She stays," Darius said. "Where I go, she goes." They fled through the hidden tunnels beneath the citadel, halls carved before memory, lined with ancient runes that glowed faintly as Darius passed. Each symbol lit for him, one by one, until the walls pulsed with light like veins in a sleeping god. The tunnels led them through the heart of the mountain. Water dripped from ceilings. The scent of stone was sharp and cold. Aaron walked ahead with a torch, muttering prayers under his breath. Seren followed behind the king's chair. And though his body was frail, though his legs did not move, the air bent around him like he carried a kingdom on his back. Once, the wheel of his chair caught on uneven stone. Seren reached to help. When her hand brushed his shoulder, her mark flared again, this time blinding, gold flooding the passage in a flash. The torch went out, and for a single heartbeat, she heard it again, not from him, not from her, but between them. A wolf's breath, a whisper. "You're not running from them. You're running toward what you were meant to be." When the light faded, the torch reignited itself. Aaron looked back, startled, but neither of them spoke. Some truths are too heavy for words. They reached the end of the tunnel just before dawn. Cold air rushed in, sharp, clean, alive. The world outside was white with snow, the horizon bruised with the first hint of morning. Darius looked toward the rising light. "It begins," he said quietly. Seren followed his gaze, her breath turning to mist. "Or ends," she whispered. The king's eyes found hers. And for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled, faint, broken, human. "Both," he said, and behind them, deep in the tunnels of Bloodvale, the mountain growled like something waking. Dawn bled over the mountains like a slow wound. The snow outside shimmered faintly pink where the light touched it. But the world below remained cold and silent, as if afraid to breathe. The three of them stood at the mouth of the cave. Aaron gripping his sword, Darius still in his chair, and Seren behind him, clutching the torch that refused to die. The wind howled past, dragging ash from the burning citadel miles above. Bloodvale was gone. What had once been a kingdom now smoldered, the smoke rising into the pale morning like a funeral for gods. They had escaped through the tunnels, leaving behind stone and shadow. But the curse followed them. It clung to the king like a second skin, bleeding light through his veins. By the time the first rays touched his face, Darius Kaelthorn no longer looked like a man. He looked like a storm disguised in flesh, and Seren could feel it, in her chest, in her blood, in the way her heartbeat wasn't hers anymore. Every time his pulse faltered, hers stumbled too. Every time he gasped, her lungs ached. Every time his hand shook, her mark burned brighter. The prophecy wasn't just awakening. It was binding. They found refuge in the ruins of an old chapel, a hollow of cracked marble and vines where the mountain once worshipped silence. Snow filtered through the roof, melting where it landed on stone. The altar still stood, half buried, carved with moons and wolves that had forgotten their names. Aaron laid the king's chair near the broken steps. His hands trembled when he looked at his alpha. "He won't last the night," he said quietly. Darius's eyes opened, faintly golden, faintly fading. "Not your choice," he murmured. But even his defiance had softened, a man's pride dissolving into exhaustion. Seren knelt beside him. The torchlight shimmered across his face, showing the cracks in his strength, the tremor in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched as if reaching for something unseen. When she touched his hand, his eyes flicked to hers, and for a heartbeat, everything else, the snow, the silence, the ruin, vanished. There was only the pull. "Your mark," he whispered. "It answers me." She swallowed hard. "It burns when you're near." He let out a hollow laugh. "That's not comfort, little one." But the word little one sounded wrong. Not condescending, not mocking. It sounded like remembrance, like something he'd said once, long ago, in another life. Aaron stepped away, pacing the ruins like a man who'd lost both God and purpose. His voice broke the quiet. "We can reach the lowlands by dawn tomorrow. There's an old healer." "There's no healer for this," Darius interrupted. His voice had... "The curse isn't wound," he said. "It's bond. It drinks from me because it's tied to something greater, something waiting to wake." His gaze found Seren's wrist. Her mark glowed faintly, pulsing in the same rhythm as his fading veins. "It's not coincidence," he whispered. "It's you." The words struck her like thunder. She pulled her hand away, shaking her head. "No, I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose it." "Neither did I," he said. "But the moon doesn't ask." The silence that followed was sharp. Somewhere above, snow slid from the roof in a sigh. Aaron stopped pacing. "What are you saying, my king?" "That her blood feeds the bond," Darius answered. "And if it breaks, I die. But if it completes..." He trailed off. The gold in his eyes flickered, dimmed. Aaron's jaw clenched. "If it completes, what?" Darius looked at Seren again. "She loses herself. The prophecy burns through her, until nothing remains but the wolf's fire. The silent moon doesn't live to see the dawn she brings." For a moment, no one spoke. The wind outside whistled through the cracks in the walls. A hymn for the dying. Seren stared at the mark on her wrist, the living, breathing sigil that pulsed now like it was listening. Her whole life she had been nothing, wolfless, worthless. A girl left to die beneath a moon that never answered. Now the moon was listening, and it demanded her in return. Night fell faster than it should have. The sky turned black before the sun had fully vanished, and frost began to creep up the chapel's broken walls. every breath clouded in front of them, shimmering faintly. Silver threads rising from the ground, from their skin, from the air itself. Magic. It was gathering, and it wanted blood. Darius's strength failed first. He gasped, clutching his chest, the gold in his veins turning dark. The chair rattled under him as though the earth itself was rejecting him. Aaron rushed forward, shouting his name, but the king's eyes found Seren, wild, desperate, still trying to speak through the pain. "Run," he managed. "Go before it takes you too." But she didn't. She knelt beside him, pressing her hand against his heart. "Don't tell me to run from what's already inside me." The moment her skin met his, the mark erupted in light. The chapel exploded in gold. Every candle reignited, every rune on the walls flared awake. The air turned molten, fire and frost colliding in a storm that made the stones tremble. Aaron stumbled back, shielding his face. But Seren didn't move. The light poured through her, out of her, until she wasn't flesh anymore, but flame shaped like a girl. Her voice broke through the roar. "Then let it take me." The magic answered. It rose between them, a ribbon of liquid fire, twisting from her chest into his. His eyes went wide, his breath catching, his broken legs trembling as power crawled back through him like resurrection. For the first time in years, the Alpha King felt the weight of his own body, not as burden, but as strength. The curse screamed. It tried to devour her light, to pull her down, but she held on, the gold from her veins mixing with the crimson in his. When she screamed, the world shook. When he gasped, the frost shattered. The fire and the cold met, spiraled, merged, until there was no curse, no king, no prophecy, only bond. Then, silence. The flames died. The light dimmed. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. Seren collapsed forward, her hand still over his heart. Darius caught her before she hit the ground. Her pulse fluttered beneath his fingers, weak, but there. He looked down at her wrist. The mark was no longer gold. It had turned deep crimson, the color of blood shared, vow sealed. Aaron approached, his face pale with awe. "What did you do?" Darius looked up slowly, his eyes glowing faintly, alive again, but no longer cursed. He whispered the answer as if afraid to speak it aloud. "She gave me her fire," he said. "And I gave her my life." Outside, the storm quieted. The mountain sighed, the wind easing as though it had been holding its breath. But high above, behind the clouds, the moon burned red. A blood moon, a sign of what was now written. An oath bound not by gods or crowns, but by blood and choice. When Seren awoke hours later, her body felt cold, her skin slick with frost. The king was beside her, standing now, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You should have run," he said softly. She smiled faintly, her voice barely a whisper. "I was never good at obedience." Darius looked toward the horizon, where dawn threatened to break again. His eyes caught the light and reflected it gold. The curse was broken, but something far more dangerous had taken its place, a bond that no prophecy could undo. The world was still the morning after the oath. Too still. Even the wind had gone silent, as if the mountains themselves feared to wake whatever now lived between Seren Vale and the Alpha King. The bond had changed them both. Darius Kaelthorn no longer looked like a man dying beneath a curse. His body hummed faintly with strength, his eyes glowing gold beneath the dawn. The air around him bent subtly, drawn to his presence as though the earth had remembered its rightful master. But his shadow was different. It no longer followed him. It moved with him. A second form, a darker pulse, walking half a step behind like something alive. And inside that shadow, faintly, eyes blinked. They returned to the mountain fortress before dusk. What remained of Bloodvale stood like a corpse. Towers cracked, banners shredded, courtyards filled with ash and crows. The crimson sigil of the council had been burned into the gates, still smoking, still defiant. Eren was the first to step through the ruins. His boots echoed on the stone floor of the great hall where the throne had once ruled all. "Their power spreads faster than rumor," he muttered. Half the guards turned. "The rest are hiding." Darius didn't answer. He didn't need to. The castle answered for him. Torches that should have been dead flared to life as he passed. The stones groaned softly, not in protest, but recognition. He had returned. But he wasn't the same king who had left, and the fortress knew it. Seren followed him quietly. Her body still trembled from the oath. The fire inside her dimmed but not gone. Sometimes she swore she could hear his heartbeat inside her own. Sometimes when he turned, her breath caught as though their lungs had forgotten how to separate. Every time she looked at his shadow, it seemed to move just a fraction too late, like it was thinking for itself. Leora's warning from the prophecy haunted her thoughts. When fire meets frost, the moon will bleed and the bond will wake. It had woken. Now it was hungering. The council had fled, but their magic hadn't. The citadel reeked of it, sour and sharp, like iron soaked in lightning. Runes glowed faintly across the arches, pulsing red, whispering threats in languages no one had spoken for centuries. At the far end of the hall, where the great dais once stood, a symbol had been carved into the marble, a circle of blood around a wolf's skull. Darius's jaw tightened. "Their final act," he said quietly. "They summoned it," Eren frowned. "Summoned what?" "The thing that guards the crown," Darius said. The shadow wolf. The floor beneath them shuddered. Dust fell from the cracked ceiling. And then, a sound. Low. Rumbling. Like thunder crawling through bone. Seren staggered back. The mark on her wrist ignited, burning hot enough to light the edges of her sleeve. From the circle of blood, smoke began to rise. It spread outward, twisting, writhing, growing shape, muscle, and breath. 2 eyes opened within it, gold, familiar, hungry. But these weren't Darius's eyes. They were older. They were his wolf's, freed from the cage of his body. The shadow wolf stepped forward, massive, monstrous, its fur made of smoke and storm. Every movement fractured the air. Its claws scraped against the stone, leaving trails of fire and frost. It stared at Darius, and for the first time since she'd met him, Seren saw fear cross the Alpha King's face. The beast was him, everything he'd kept buried, everything the curse had chained. And now it wanted freedom. Eren raised his sword, his voice breaking. "My king, it's bound to you." "I know," Darius said. The wolf growled, circling him, shoulders scraping the pillars as it passed. Its form flickered, half flesh, half shadow, one moment maned and regal, the next skeletal and void. Every time it breathed, the torches dimmed. Seren could feel the bond between them thrumming like a live wire. The beast's power pulled through it, clawing at her chest, dragging heat from her lungs. The gold in Darius's veins burned darker, twisting to red. The oath they had made, the blood they had shared, was now its chain, and the wolf was trying to break it. "Seren," Darius said, his voice trembling under the strain. "Go!" She didn't move. The wolf lunged. Darius raised his arm, summoning a burst of power that split the floor between them. Fire erupted from the crack, but the beast tore through it like smoke through light. It struck him, sending the throne shattering against the wall. Stone exploded in sparks. Eren charged, sword flashing, but the beast's tail lashed out, a whip of shadow that sent him flying across the hall. "Stay back!" Darius roared. He stood, somehow steady now, his legs trembling but holding. Lightning crawled up his arms, the same glow mirrored in Seren's mark. The bond had awakened fully, and now it demanded to be used. Seren staggered toward him, voice shaking. "You can't fight it. It's you." "I can," he said, eyes locked on the creature. "But not alone." The meaning hit her before the words finished. Their connection, the oath, it wasn't just curse. It was weapon. If they stood together, they could control it. If they failed, the bond would consume them both. She reached for him. Their hands met, light and shadow colliding, fire and frost twisting into one. The wolf roared. The hall shattered with sound and light. Magic poured from their joined hands, spiraling upward in ribbons of flame and snow, wrapping around the beast, forcing it back toward the blood circle. It resisted, shrieking in a sound no creature should make, rage and grief and hunger bound into one. But Seren didn't let go. She pushed harder, her mark blazing until her skin split and blood dripped onto the floor. Blood that glowed, blood that sang. Darius's voice joined hers, deep and guttural, ancient words pouring from his throat, the language of the first alphas. The wolf fought, then faltered, then froze, half its form already dissolving into smoke. Its eyes met Serene's, gold fading to ember. And in that final instant she understood. It wasn't rage. It was sorrow. The wolf didn't want freedom. It wanted release. The last roar became a whisper. The shadow crumbled into ash, the smoke rising through the broken roof and out into the bleeding sky. The runes on the walls dimmed one by one, the red light dying. The fortress exhaled, long and heavy, as if the mountain itself had let go of a breath it had held for centuries. Darius fell to his knees, gasping. Seren caught him before he hit the floor, her hands shaking, her skin still glowing faintly from the magic. The hall was silent. Aaron limped toward them, leaning on his sword, his face streaked with blood and disbelief. "It's over," he whispered. "The wolf is gone." Darius shook his head weakly. "No," he said, voice rough, almost tender. "It's not gone." He looked at Seren. "It's hers now." Her eyes widened. She looked down at her mark and saw that it had changed again. No longer gold. No longer crimson. Black. A perfect, dark spiral, faintly shimmering like the surface of obsidian under moonlight. Inside her chest, something moved. Not violently, not painfully, but with presence. A second heartbeat, steady, patient, powerful. The curse had broken. The wolf had fallen, but the bond had evolved. She wasn't just bound to the Alpha King anymore. She was bound to the very spirit that had haunted him, and through her, it lived again. Outside, dawn began to break, cold and silver. Snow fell quietly through the shattered ceiling, melting as it touched the embers on the floor. Darius reached for her hand. His touch was warm now, steady, human. "You saved me," he said softly. Seren looked toward the rising light. "No," she whispered. "We saved each other," the king smiled faintly. But behind that smile, shadows still lingered. Not dark, but deep. Because even salvation has a price. And the bond between them had just written it in blood. The storm that had haunted Bloodvale for generations was gone. But the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Ash drifted through the ruined halls like falling snow, glowing faintly with embers that refused to die. The great wolves carved into the pillars no longer snarled. Their stone faces softened, almost human, as if the castle itself had exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. In the center of the broken throne room stood the Alpha King and the girl who had bound his fate. Their shadows burned long against the marble floor. One golden, one dark Darius Kaelthorn had changed. The weight that once bent his spine was gone. The sickness, the curse, the weakness, all buried beneath the bond that had rewritten his blood. His power no longer raged wild. It flowed, quiet, measured, a storm-learning gentleness. And yet, when he looked at Seren Vale, he still saw the chains she had broken for him, the ones that now wrapped around her instead. She had grown pale, her skin almost translucent, veins glowing faintly like threads of moonlight beneath frost. The mark on her wrist, the black spiral, pulsed with every heartbeat of the world around them. When she moved, the air followed. When she breathed, the torches flickered. When she closed her eyes, the walls seemed to listen. She was not the wolfless girl anymore. She was the silent moon reborn, the prophecy fulfilled. And the price of prophecy was always blood. Aaron and Leora returned days later with the survivors, guards, healers, and those who still swore loyalty to the crown. They found the throne room rebuilt by unseen hands, the cracked walls sealed, the roof whole again, but there was no crown upon the dais, no king upon the throne, only two figures standing beneath the moonlight that poured through the open archway. "She's fading," Leora whispered, her old eyes wet with something close to reverence. "The bond burns brighter than her body can hold." Darius didn't look away from Seren. "I can stop it." The healer shook her head. "You can't, you're the fire. She's the vessel. One must break before the other survives." He clenched his fists, veins glowing gold once more. "I won't let her die for me." "Then you'll undo everything," she said softly. "The curse, the prophecy, the peace she bought with her pain," her voice faltered. "The world will fall back into shadow." Serene stirred at their voices. Her eyes opened slowly, pale silver, luminous, ancient. When she spoke, her voice wasn't just hers anymore. It carried two tones, her own, and another beneath it. The echo of the wolf that now lived within her. "Don't fight it," she whispered. "It's not death. It's returning." He knelt beside her, his breath trembling. "I don't understand." She smiled faintly, and the expression was pure moonlight, soft, sorrowful, infinite. "The silent moon doesn't end, Darius. It becomes... The light that breaks the curse doesn't stay. It passes on." He caught her hand. Her fingers were cold, her pulse a flicker. "I can't lose you," he said, voice breaking on the words. "You won't." Her thumb brushed his jaw. "You'll carry me, like I carried your curse." The air thickened, shimmering with faint light. The mark on her wrist began to dissolve, black, fading into silver, silver into dust. Each breath she took came slower, softer. Each moment she held his gaze, the bond between them pulsed brighter, gold and silver threads tangling until the room was filled with their glow. Aaron bowed his head. Leora whispered a prayer to no god she believed in, and then the light broke. It didn't explode. It unfolded. Waves of warmth rippled outward, rolling through the fortress, over the mountain, into the valleys beyond. Snow melted. Old graves bloomed with white flowers. The howl of 1,000 wolves rose across the kingdom, not of rage, but of rebirth. And above them all, the moon turned blood silver. When the light faded, Seren Vale was gone. Only her cloak remained, folded neatly where she had knelt. Darius stood motionless, staring at the space she had left behind. The silence pressed in on him, raw and endless. Then he felt it. A hand, not physical, not flesh, pressing against his chest from within. Her warmth, her heartbeat, not lost, merged. The bond had not died. It had completed. He lifted his head. The gold in his eyes was gone, replaced by something softer, a glow of silver threaded with faint black, the mark of her moon inside his blood. When he spoke, his voice carried like thunder made of light. "She lives through me," he said, "and through me the world will not forget her name." Years passed. The ruins of Bloodvale became a kingdom again. Under his rule, the wars ended. The packs united. The moon, once a thing of fear, became a symbol of peace. But each year, on the night of the blood moon, the castle would fall silent. The fires would dim, and the king would walk alone into the great hall, where two shadows still danced on the wall, one golden, one dark. He would rest his hand against the cold stone and whisper her name, and for a heartbeat the air would warm, the scent of frost and cedar would rise, and her voice, faint, beloved, would answer, "I told you, Darius, you would never lose me." That night, the moon shone brighter than it ever had, silver fire spilling across the mountain, over the sleeping forests, across the plains. And somewhere deep within the wind, a wolf howled, not of pain, not of grief, but of eternity. The Alpha King raised his head, and for the first time, the world bowed not before a man, but before what he had become, not just a king, not just a survivor, the Luna King, the one who carried both the beast and the moon inside his heart.